when you say dikduk, it's an off-putting subject. People just run the other way when you say dikduk. For some reason, it's a frightening topic. And I hope that after today, you won't think of it that way any longer. Every class has to have some objective. So my objective in this class is to infect you, like I've been infected with the language that the Tanakh has embedded in it and the amount of depth that the language has. So hopefully we're going to start with a little background information. And again, I hope really that you'll get infected a little bit, and not from the idea of misery loves company, but that you'll take it upon yourselves to do a little more research and do a little more investigation. Of course, this subject is the foundation of Mefareshei HaTanakh. Without this foundation, Parshanut goes out the window. Okay, so the first aspect of this class is a little historical information, and I hope that a couple of you know this already. I'm sure you do, but I'm going to repeat it for those that were not privy to it in any of our previous engagements. We all know, anybody have an idea when the Talmud was finished? What year? What year?
The 6th century?
Yeah, 6th century approximately. So the Talmud, from the end of the Talmudic period until approximately the 10th century, there was called the Masoretic period. And that was the period during which Chachamim in two centers of Torah, one in Bavel and one in Tiberia, developed the system of Te'amim and Nekudot for the Tanakh. Before that, there was no Te'amim or Nekudot, even though it was referenced in the Gemara in some places, there was no Te'amim or Nekudot. These symbol systems were developed by Chachmei HaMesorah, and it took approximately 500 years for the effort. So we shouldn't discount the amount of depth that it contains. This is not our topic for this class, so I just mentioned it at the beginning to mention that the grammatical period began.
Excuse me, but there was a Mesorah prior to that. Someone went up to the Torah.
That's right.
To how to read.
That's right, but it was all Ba'al Peh.
Okay.
So how did they convey to children? Well, how did they convey to anyone how to read? From what? It's just Ba'al Peh, Kabbalah, Av Leben. But the Chachmei HaMesorah's fear was that it's going to be forgotten. So similar to the Mishnah and the Gemara, they had to develop a system that would convey the accurate reading and the accurate transmission of the Tanakh to future generations. But it wasn't only limited to reading, they had other objectives, such as the proper division in the Tanakh division in terms of Pesukim, where the Pesukim begin and end, where the Parashot begin and end, Parashiot, Setumot, Uftuhot, etc. So they had a lot of material that they had to cover. Otiyot Menuzarot, big letters, small letters, they covered all that. At the end of the Masoretic period, which was, as I mentioned, approximately the 10th century, late 10th century, was the beginning of the grammatical period. The grammar, Chachamim, the Rishonim in grammar began towards the end of the Masoretic period. And the reason for that is that they needed a source. The spoken language at the time between Chorban, Bayit, Rishon, which was, anybody? 586. Until that period, the lingua franca was, anybody? Aramaic. That's what everyone spoke. That's why the Gemara was in Aramite, because that was the spoken language. So the Chachamim, the grammarians, said, okay, now we cannot allow Hebrew to fall into total disuse, and with Arabic now becoming the lingua franca at the time and replacing Aramaic, they decided now we have to revive Hebrew. But what was their source material? They had to revive it from something. Their sources were the Tanakh, the Mishnah, and the responsa of the Geonim, the She'elot u'Tshuvot Geonim. That was their, so to speak, laboratory for the material that they had to come up with. They couldn't come up with it just out of the blue. Certainly, they must have had some historical notes or whatever you may call them, but to formalize it and to put it in a systematic method, they needed source material. These Chachamim utilized the Tanakh as we have it today. When it was codified in 915, approximately, these Chachamim utilized this Tanakh. The Rishonim now had to develop now some certain rules and foundations and foundational principles. Of course, they wanted to know what do the words mean. So there had to be an effort to develop a concept. What do the words mean in the Tanakh? So the first effort was approximately 900 something or 920 by the Bisa Adia Gaon in Sefer HaEgron, or Sefer HaAgron, however you want to pronounce it, which was really primarily a source book for poetic Hebrew. It wasn't really a dictionary or any kind of source for the understanding of words. Approximately, I don't know if any one of you have heard of it, Rabbi Menachem ibn Saruk, who lived approximately 920 of the Common Era to approximately 970. His date of birth is approximately 920, some say 910. He was the first Chacham that came up with the idea that the word in Hebrew, the Hebrew word, is built around a root letters. And he composed a dictionary called Mahberet Menachem, in which he listed all the roots of his, according to his concept. He believed a root could be any number of letters from 1 to 4. It could be 1 letter, 2 letters, 3 letters, 4 letters. So for an example, the letter Zayin is the root of the word Vayaz in the Pasuk, Vayaz min minnu. And he developed that system first, recognizing the roots, and he gave you those roots in terms of mahlakot, pieces, meaning this is what it means in these situations. They don't have to all mean the same thing, but he gave it to you a number of mahlakot, 8, 4, 10, whatever that number may be. Immediately upon his the appearance of Mahberet Menachem, which was his work, the book is available on HebrewBooks.org, by the way, if you want to download it. There's a lot of hidushim in there that you could mine. Immediately upon the appearance of Mahberet Menachem, there was tremendous controversy. He was immediately disagreed with by Dunash ibn Ladrat, and he was actually really abused. He was thrown out of his house on Shabbat. He was publicly shamed. His patron withdrew his support all over this issue. His defenders were his disciples. His disciples were, 2 of them were the Rabbi Yitzchak ibn Gikatila and the Rabbi Yehuda ibn Hayush. And Rabbi Yehuda ibn Hayush was the one who gave us the triliteral root. And in that triliteral root, he was able to make the jump into conjugating a verb, into that next level of grammar by providing that triliteral root. But we should not discount Rabbi Menachem ibn Saruk so easily. In this page, on the page 1 on the back, I gave you a specific example of why Ibn Saruk should not be discounted. There's two Pesukim on the bottom of that page, two pieces of Pesukim. Anybody want to explain them? David, Faddal. V'shavti b'shalom, you Baal Koreh, you know where that's from?
V'shavti b'shalom b'beit Avi, I will return in peace to my father's house.
Yaakov said it, Parashat Vayisef. Next one.
V'shavti b'beit Adonai l'orech yamin, I will sit in the house of Hashem for many, many days. Long days.
Does it bother you?
Sit or return.
Does that bother you? Those two Pesukim being explained that way? If you look at the word is the same. V'shavti is the same in both. So the second one, the first one has to be to return. V'shavti b'shalom el bet avi. I will return to something. V'shavti bevet Hashem le'orech yamin means something that I'm going to sit, for lack of a better word at this time, I'm going to sit in the house of Hashem. Shouldn't it say, according to the Bi Yehuda Hayuj, it should say, V'yashavti b'shalom el beit avi, right? The shortish for to sit is yashav. So if you look at the chart on the top, on the left is what Rabbi Menachem Ibn Saruk says is the shortish. The shortish is Shin Bet. That's the shortish. And from that shortish, he derives Shev limini, return, sit to my right. Kishav api, my anger receded. Vayelech shovav, stubborn. Vayishp mimenu shevi, he was captured, someone was captured. Shuvah Hashem levivot alfei Yisrael, he defines as margoa. What does margoa mean? Anybody? Margoa. Calm. Yeah, calm, comfort. So his explanation of Shuvah Hashem levivot alfei Yisrael, how do you explain that section? Uvnu ho yomar Shuvah Hashem levivot alfei Yisrael. Vahi bin Soran ha'aron vayomed Moshe Kuma amona v'yafutzu oyevecha v'yanusu v'sanecha netanecha. Right? Get up, fight. Enemies will disperse. Uvnu ho yomar, when the Aron is put down, Shuvah Hashem levivot alfei Yisrael. So what does Shuvah Hashem levivot alfei Yisrael mean? What does Shuvah Hashem mean in that context?
Can it also mean like let Hazir bring them back?
No. That's how it's explained, but that's now not how the Menachem Ibn Saruk explains it. And Steinsaltz, I think, and Seforno adopt his point of view. That Shuvah means is from the element of margoa, to be comfortable, or to be relaxed, or to be calm, etc. And they explain it as Hashem will be calm or will be rested betoch rivivot alfei Yisrael. That's how Steinsaltz explains it. Seforno explains it a little differently, using the word shuvah as a noun as opposed to a verb, but with the same context. So now we understand what the Tehillim 23 says, V'shavti bevet Hashem le'orech yamin. I will sit in comfort, I will be comfortable. And now we don't have to worry about the shortish. So the Menachem Ibn Saruk is not so, it's not so out of line, in this particular case. He has many other perushim and many other aspects of his work. So, for example, tochelu mimenuna uvasher mevushal b'mayim. What's tochelu mimenuna? What's the accepted explanation of the word na? Raw. And he says it's redundant. The Torah is telling you how to eat it right after that. So he's saying no, the shortish is from the same shortish as lamma teni'un, to be annoyed. You can't eat Korban Pesach in an annoyed state. So we have to give Rabbi Menachem ibn Saruk a little credit for being a little more open-minded. I'm sorry? Yeah. No, Kim said yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Once you have Kim Siliyesh, you don't need Bashim Mushalamai either.
No, but we know it's cooked. How's it cooked? Bashem B'Shan Kim City, not that, but this, but not raw. Not raw is redundant to both those later sentences, right? Ki Bashem B'Shan B'Mayim Kim City Yesh, right? Those are have cooking ways, but not raw. Okay? So let's put that aside for now. So now we have the Yehuda Hayuj standard of the triliteral root was accepted. And two Hachamim, subsequent to the Yehuda Hayuj, the first was Rabbeinu Yonah ibn Janach, wrote a book called Sefer HaSharashi. Back it up. How's the plural of Shoresh? Sharashi. Okay.
Not sure, Rashid.
Not Shorashi. Not Shorashi. Right? V'yasa choter b'geza yishai v'neser misharashav yifre. Not Shorashav yifre. Right? V'haya ke'etz shatul al-mayim v'al yuval yishalach sharashav. Right? Those are the Pesukim. I think there's a few cases in the Tanakh where it's Sharashav. So we know that so it has to be Sharashim. And modern Hebrew is Shorashim, of course, but okay. So now that the Rabbeinu Yonah wrote a book, Sefer HaSharashim, of which was essentially duplicated or almost duplicated by Radak in his Sefer HaSharashim. They both had Sefer HaSharashim. Both of them used the triliteral root as the basis of their books. Radak lists a number of Sharashim that are 4 and one Shoresh that's 5. Okay? So let's go on. I just answered the first question. Can a word have more than a 3-letter root? And the answer is rarely, but yes. And the only root that's 5, according to Radak, is Sephardeya. Okay?
How is that a verb? How is it a verb?
It's not a verb. Wait, that's a great question. Let's go on. Are all types of words built around the root? We have to answer that question. Is a noun built around the root? Or is a noun, say you have a tree, the name of a tree, or the name of an animal, is it built around a root? So let's go on. We know that roots are visible in adjectives, right? Big, gadol, the root is gimal, daled, lamed, right? Nouns are roots visible in nouns.
Yes.
Certainly, right? And there's mishkalim, meaning word forms that detail how the noun is adapted from the root. For example, the look of something, mar'eh, is from the shorish ra'ah, etc. Radak in Sefer HaMichlol gives you all of these mishkalim in the words and how they're built around certain roots. Okay. And are roots limited to words of action? Not necessarily. So if anyone wants to read the first root in Radak, anybody? Sefer HaSharashim, anybody? Victor, you want to read it? Faddal. It's right here. It's the 3rd page.
Verb root introduction, is that what
Yeah.
does all words have a root? Is that what it is?
Right here. Are roots limited to words of action? You have Evan.
So, Evan. והאבן הזאת, זה הוציא את האבן. וכן ייתן על האבנים.
על האוזניים.
ייתן על האוזניים. מקום נפילת הבלד, בבית אדמו, להיקרא.
משבית.
אבל המילה הזאת נגזרה מן בן ובנים. עצמו, ונקרא אוזניים על שם הבנים.
So what Radak is saying here, essentially, is that a noun can be a root. And from that root, you can develop other roots. Ben, banim, ofnaim, etc. So we're not limited that a root is only a word of action. A root can be a noun. A root can be something. So for example, go to the next word. Must all words have a root? If anyone wants to read that one, Vic, you want to read it? Hadda'a, it's from Vayikra. This is Ibn Azra, by the way.
הדעה, that's that bird. ויש אומרים שנשר מן אשורנו. פרס מן הלא פרס לרעב. עוזיה מן עוז, והנון נוספו, והונה הנקרא עקבה. ודעה מן כאשר ידעה הנשר,
והיה.
שמנהגה לשבת באיים ידועים.
So what Ibn Azra is saying in this particular section is that words have roots. They don't have to, the root does not necessarily have to be a word of action. It could be a word signifying something else. It could be a word, a noun, a non-active word. You have a question, Dave, or no? Good? Okay. Before we go to number 6, I want you to look at this third page.
Quick question.
Yeah.
When it says the root is nosaf, is that just, so it's not really part of the shoresh,
Right.
but it was, why is it added?
Either
Just for that, it just came that way?
either because it's a feminine type of thing, or zniyah, it could be something else. Oni is boat. Oniyah is a boat. Some other things. Ibn Azra, by the way, has a lot of that. The shortish of Laila is Lail. Ve'ha'e nosaf. Got it? Okay. I'd like to point out a couple of things about, and my point in this class, by the way, my objective is that we have to get to a point of recognizing the root of the word. So what I mentioned prior to this is that words have roots, the types of roots that they have, words of action, adjectives, nouns, etc. have roots, who develop the roots, etc. Now we're going to have some complications to that understanding of how to recognize a root. Okay? Anybody want to read the pasuk by Yikach? Joe, you want to read it? Kach Abraham. It's this extra third page, alone. Oh, any one of you. Go ahead, Fadal.
ויקח אברהם את ישמעאל בנו ואת כל ילידי ביתו ואת כל מקנת כספו כל זכר באנשי בית אברהם עמו את בשר לאותו בית היום הזה וכל אנשי ביתו יוליד בית ומקנה כסף מאת בן נכר נמולו איתו.
Okay, so we have the issue of circumcision in the end of Parashat Lech Lecha. And it says, Vayamol et besar or latam. What's the shortish of Vayamol? Anybody? Hmm? No. Mim Lamed here would not be that. Huh?
Mem vav lamed.
Shuv, right. Shuv mol et Israel shenit, right? Mem vav lamed, right? וכל אנשי ביתו יליד בית ומקנת כסף מאת בן נכר נמולו was circumcised with him, right? What is the shortish of nimolu?
Same.
Same,
Mem vav lamed.
Nun mem lamed. Read the Ibn Azra right below. So Ibn Azra and the grammarians hold that a word can have more than one root. The same word can have more than one root. But it gets a bit more complicated.
What does that mean though? That's just linguistics.
It's because it could be because of the usage that they.
Why do you have to change it to nun mem nal?
I can't answer that question because the language that we have in the Torah, in the Tanakh, is pretty limited. We don't have enough examples of these situations that we could define something based on a prevalence of situations. So if you want to look up something and find out why in this week's parasha, Ushema has a hatapatah under the sheen, you look up all the times that word appears in the Tanakh, and you'll see every time it has a patah under the mem, it's ushma, and every time it has a kametz under the mem, it's at a ta'am mafsik with a hataf. So you see the relationship. In a lot of these cases, we don't have enough of those examples to form a judgment.
So what does Nimolu Itor mean? What does Nimolu Itor mean?
Was circumcised. Nin molu. One noon drops, and you have a dagesh hazak in the mem to compensate for the drop of the noon. So it's nimolu ito. Okay?
So, Mishloach Sifanim, can you do the parallel for us?
He's saying that the shoresh is shalach, right? But he's comparing it to the form. Nishloach should be ninmolu. He's saying the form should be. He's not comparing like and saying shalach now appears as shin lamed het and nun lamed het or anything of that nature. He's just saying that compare the form of nimolu to nishloach, and that's how you know that the shoresh is nun mem lamed. Right? Okay. There's another complication in determining roots that's very confusing and very prevalent. I don't know if my English corresponding word is correct. Anagram. It's called sikul ha'itzurim, when consonants within the root flip positions. So you may have a tendency when you see that to think either the root is different or that the root is somehow something else. The first example, of course, is from Bereshit. Vateled et Cain, vatomer, kaniti ish. The yod is flipped to after the noon. So we shouldn't think, or the yod of Cain is flipped before the noon. Take your pick. We have many nouns that have the same situation. Keves, kesev.
That's earth and land.
I'm sorry?
Earth and land.
Yeah. Salma and simla. Same thing. Words that the letters flip positions. The weaker verbs, and by weaker verbs I mean the verbs that have letters like vav, yod, right? He, not aleph. Vav, yod, he, the heavy letters, but not aleph. Those letters have a habit of flipping positions more often than other words. So, for example, the first example, the next two examples I'm giving you, Kol ha-neheshalim acharecha, right? What is the neheshalim? What's the shoresh? Shoresh is halash, but look at the position of the letters. Het, shin, lamed. I never really, when I was a kid, I never understood how they got, he attacked the weak at the rear. Kol ha-neheshalim acharecha, from that word neheshalim. I didn't understand at the time, years back, that this is a case of what's called sikul ha'itzurim, where the consonants change positions. Of course, in the Anyan, in Beshalach, Vayahalosh Yehoshua, you have the shoresh in its proper three-letter form. And similarly, in Kat, Asir, and Tehillim, and you have Na'akat B'nai Yisrael, you have the flip of the Aleph and the Nun. So the point of recognizing that this is a very, very significant, many cases. And there's actually, you have Kilo Vaza Velo Shikhat Zenut Ami. The shortish is Baza, right? Bet Zayin He. Pen Nihye Lavuz. The shortish is booze. But they are the same meaning. The words, the consonants not only change positions, but we have, of course, we know interchangeability of the consonants of the weaker letters. Vav become Yod, Yod become Vav, like Ra'iti. Yod is become He of the shortish. The shortish is Resh Aleph He. It should be Ra'ahti, like Shamarti, but the He changes to Yod, it's Ra'iti. So we have that added aspect of those letters that interchange, plus they change positions. So the challenge is to recognize the shortish within those particular parameters of this interchangeability. There's a very interesting one that, how do you say tired in Hebrew? Ayef, are you sure? Noten la ya'ev koach. That, right? Vehem, vehu, ayef, ve'yacheya, ve'lo yareh Elohim, right? Ayef, there is why. And why don't they use ya'ef? And the shortish is clearly different because ayin vav peh is to fly. So when you say vaya'of, to fly, and ya'ef yod ayin peh is to be tired. Vaya'af David in Shemuel. So clearly they are two separate sharashim. Yet Radak, it's an amazing thing, and it's part of his perush in that particular shortish of uf ayin vav peh, that means to fly. He includes pesukim that apparently mean someone is tired. So it becomes a little challenging to get to the bottom of what the pesukim really mean, and what and how the Mefarshim explain all of these occurrences. But it is rewarding. So now, with all of this in mind, interchangeability of the letters and the positions of the weaker letters, let's now circle back to the Bimenachem ibn Saruk. And I'm not saying that we should now adopt what he says, but now let's think a little bit. He has a two-letter root, ayin peh, hypothetically. Ed yod, it means this. Ed vav, it means this. Shin bet, ed this. There's a lot of interesting ones like that, where his position may be have good foundation and logic. Where what is the real root? The real root is these two letters. But we add this, it becomes this. We add this, it becomes this. We add this, it becomes this. So in the case of shuv, shin bet, or not shuv, shin bet, you had yashav, shuv, shava, captive, right? So you have three at least, right? There's four.
So you're connecting different words with roots that have common roots. Is it really technical, or because we love to say how the words, the meanings themselves are related when they have a similar root? So are they going for that also, or is it just?
I'm not following your question.
When you have two different words that have a similar root, a lot of times the meaning is related, even if it's two different nouns. I can't give you an example, but.
No, it could be even identical meanings, and it could be, it's like let me think of one for a minute. The shortish, to be fearful, yahar, this week's parashat, so I'm thinking about it, right, is yahar, yod gimel resh, right, yahorti, right, yahorti mipnei ish is obviously yud gimel resh is the shortish. But gur is also used in that understanding. Lo tahuru mipnei ish, right, do not, so those you see clearly the interchangeability of those roots. What I'm having, and part of what I like to look at is how did Mefarshim look at this right? And how does Radak, or how does Ibn Janah, or how does Ibn Izrael and Medaktekim Rishonim explain these Sharashim appearing in certain cases when maybe it doesn't mean that way, or maybe it shouldn't mean that way? Ayif, Ya'if, etc. It's very interesting.
Actually, it would have something like this, like two different verbs, but the same shoresh, like vayavo and vayavi.
That's a
That would
different
be
binyan. We're going to get
like,
that.
but I'm saying that it could, when you come, and when you come in, you bring yourself. I was thinking of a relatedness.
Well, that's, we're going to get to that in a minute. In a minute. One second. So, another aspect that may confuse us into Sharashim is the contractions. And I give one example. Madua. What is it made of? Ma-dua. Dua, according to Radak, is one of the subsidiary Sharashim or alternate Sharashim of Yada or Yada. So, Madua, what is it known? Or what do you know? Or why is it happening? Etc. Okay. So the difficulty in recognizing the Sharashim and understanding the Mefarashei HaTanakh is fundamentally analyzed by these basic points. But there's an added aspect to all of this that needs to be clarified. And that's, how do the binyanim, when you have everyone knows what a binyan is? Anybody? How do you conjugate a verb is called a binyan? And I don't know if I'm going to lose anybody on this one. No? Everyone's okay? Originally, the Medaktekim said there were 8 binyanim. One of them dropped out of common acceptance. Now there are 7 binyanim. And part of recognizing that binyan, the 8th binyan, by the way, was coined by the Yehuda Hayuj, and Radak actually agreed with him. Ibn Izra disagreed, and today we adopted the Ibn Izra point of view that there are only 7 binyanim, even though Radak coined it in Sefer HaMechlot as 8. Within those binyanim, we have to be able to recognize the shortish of the word. So I put here, and if I go over a little bit, don't hold me to it. From here on is an explanation of what the binyanim are. But before that, I know I'm running ahead, so you have to excuse me. Before that, I want to go over basic, I think am I missing a page? A moment. That's this page. The verb root introduction. And these are just common, and I'm sure there are ways to refer to the verb root. Like we said, if you look at number A, the verb is composed of 3 letters. A complete verb is called shalem or shelemim, meaning in its conjugated form, no letters drop. Some verbs lose letters in conjugation. And the word po'al, that word po'al is used to refer to the letters of the shortish. So the first letter of the shortish is referred to as pe ha'po'al. The second letter is ayin ha'po'al. The third letter is lamed ha'po'al. There are classifications going to be, and if I go too fast, let me know. Classifications are called a gizra. There are gizrot, right? Or gizarot, actually, of verbs. So shelemim is one gizra. Haserim is another gizra, meaning where letters disappear in its conjugated form. And doubled letters, kefulim. That's another gizra. In haserim, and I give you some examples below, you have some of them that we all are familiar with. For example, the shortish nafal. How do you say, I will ipol? I will fall. Ipol. The noon drops.
אני עומד מפה.
Right. Right. and this hasre sharashim. But all of these are all you have to be familiar with. And of course, go to C and D, intransitive and transitive. Intransitive verbs are those that don't take an object. Transitive verbs are verbs that take an object. In E, I jumped to it before, we have 7 binyanim today. Pa'al, which is binyan kal, nif'al, pi'al, pu'al, hitpa'al, hif'il, huf'al. And of course, the tenses, which we know from English, past, future, present. Imperative in Hebrew is savoy. I'm telling you to do something. I'm commanding you to do something. And infinitive is livkot, for example. I don't know the exact English correspondence. You had a question? I'm sorry? Yeah, but I don't know what I think they call it that way also in English, infinitive. Okay, so now if you go, I'm trying to get to the point, hopefully, I know time is limited, that, and I will do it briefly, if you don't mind. Let's go to this page that says uses of the binyanim, okay? And this is a method that I like to use to recognize the shoresh, to recognize the root. And the reason I want to recognize the root is I want to go to the source material also, either Radak and Sefer Sharashim, Ibn Janach Sefer Sharashim, Menachem ibn Saruq, also in his Mahbenet Menachem, or also because I want to look it up in a concordance. I don't know if you guys have a concordance. You know what it is, guys? Yeah. Okay. To be able to look it up and see all the times that shoresh appears in the Tanakh, and hopefully get an understanding of what it really means. What does that shoresh really mean? Okay, so binyan kal is called binyan kal or pa'al. Pa'al is because it has no degeshim in its conjugated forms, unless the letter drops, of course, and no additional letters except in atid. So it's an easy binyan. So if you had, you wanted to recognize a shoresh of, you have the shoresh pakadati. The shoresh pakadati is the one that all the grammarians use because it appears in all the 7 binyanim throughout the Tanakh. And also subsidiary binyanim, we'll get to that in a minute, but, okay. So it's easy. So if you wanted to know what the shoresh is, you take a shoresh like pakadti or shamarti and apply that to what you're looking at and say, what are the letters of the shoresh? If you go to nif'al, nif'al is the intransitive binyan of kal, right? Kal is a, if you look at the usages, is if it refers to oneself sometimes, like I stood, I sat, etc. That's binyan kal. And when you perform the action on yourself, or you're performing the action on one other object, right? Shamarti et hadavar, etc. One object, and occasionally it functions like hif'il. We'll get to hif'il later in certain usages. I'm getting too complicated and I don't want to. I did this for your own reference, and this is a Hebrew version that I had written way back when, and I translated it in ChatGPT to this. It was a lot faster. Okay, they did it actually pretty good job, by the way. I had to just fix up a couple of things. So now if you looked at binyan nif'al, which is the reflexive opposite of kal. Kal gets an object primarily. Nif'al doesn't get an object because it's an action performed on oneself or referring to oneself. So if you look at ne'echalti, the nun is the prefix signifying that binyan. So you want to recognize the shoresh, take that nun out, achal. Recognize the shoresh. And the usages are listed below, and you can take a look at them on your own, etc. I'm going to go to Pi'il now, because Pi'il is interesting. Pi'il is a transitive verb, meaning it gets an object, right? But the object can be, it's a more emphatic action. Like you could say, shiber, right? You break something, right? You could also say shover. You could say medaber, you could say dover, etc. It's a more emphatic action. You could look at E and F, gives you some other usages that are interesting. Could mean opposite. Dishenu et hamizbeach doesn't mean put ashes on the mizbeach, it means remove ashes from the mizbeach. Okay? Going to pu'al. Pu'al is the reflexive form of pi'il, meaning that's the binyan that takes the action, right? Vehugad lecha v'shamata.
But on PL, will always appear the same shoresh in Ma'al.
No.
There are certain shoreshim that only appear.
Parent peer, correct. There was actually a very interesting one that Ezra ran into in yeshiva way back. Hashem migen sarecha beyadecha vayiten lo ma'aser mikol. What's migen? It's pi'il, right? What's the shortish? Mem gimal nun. So, unfortunately, they explained it, many explained it, as he shielded you.
Magen David.
But it makes no sense. Shielded you from your, what does it mean? No. Migen means something, sometimes could mean the opposite, like in V'tishenu. It means I gave over your enemies to you. I masarti, to be given over an enemy, not to protect you from an enemy, to give over your enemy. Machen and kal is protection. So PL has a lot more, nuance, so a little more nuance. Pu'al, let's go now, fourth, is, now to recognize the shoresh and PL, you have them, the three letters, right? Debarti, ani debarti, dalet, beteresh, you don't need, there's no prefix, so it's easy to recognize. Pu'al is the same, it's reflective, of PL, so it's easily recognized. Hadavar, Asher Pukad al Pi Moshe. Easy, very easy to recognize. You go to Hif'il, I think that's the next one. Hif'il, which is an interesting binyan because it converts the Sharashim in Kal from reflexive, the ones that are reflexive in Kal, meaning like Ani Amadati, right? I stood, has no object because you're talking about yourself. But when you use it in Pi'il, it gets an object. Ani he'imadti binyan, or maseva, right? Hisafti maseva. It converts that one to one that gets an object. The indicator of hif'il is a prefixed he. So again, if you want to recognize the shoresh, you have to take out that prefixed he. Another interesting aspect of hif'il is that, you could use it, you could see this usages here, but I just want to point it out. It's also Yosel Sheni, how do you say that in English? It can have two objects, right? So the shortish katav, when you're using it in kal, has one object. Ani katavti sefer. I wrote what? A book. Ani hichtavti sefer. I dictated, or I caused you to write what? A book. Two objects, you and the book. So the shoresh amad in kal is reflexive. In hif'il, it's yoseh le'ehad, one object. But those that have an object in kal can get two objects in hif'il. Again, the marker, the hif'il marker, is the hair.
Do you ever see if you apply it to a verb
To which verbs?
Peh, like where the hair is the first verb.
Peh. Yes. Why not?
What would happen to the first pair?
It drops, and you get a dagesh hazak after for the compensating letter.
What's an example?
Some say the shortest of hikah is hikah, so hikiti would be hikiti, etc. Hof'al is the reflexive of hif'il. And in all the reflexives, meaning when the action is performed on oneself, there's no imperative. You can't command someone to do something to yourself, etc. Hitpa'il is the last binyan that we're going to speak about. And hof'al again is marked by the hair. So you could recognize the shortish again. Asher hofqad ito. Hofqad, hair, easily recognizable. Hitpa'il is reflexive upon, is an action you do to yourself. Hit labashti, hit kadashti, etc. Hit qalahti, etc. Those are actions you perform on yourself. Also indicates hit halech, like hit halech nawah, etc. Mitkabbed, maybe used deceptively. If you look at C, someone that acts honorably but really isn't, is mitkabbed. It's almost like a sarcastic binyan. And expresses emotion. There's, by the way, and the binyan hitpa'il has an interesting subsidiary binyanim. How do you say, I prepared myself? Ani hit, right. Why is it not hit kananti? Right? Hitpa'il is hitpa'il. Right? That's just like a subsidiary form of hitpa'il. And there's like a hotpa'il, which is a combination of hitpa'il and huf'al. Asher halviyim lo haqedu betocham. So you have other. So this is kind of like a watered down approach to the binyanim. So hopefully we can get an understanding of how to recognize Sharashim in the Mikra. And ultimately, when we do recognize the Sharashim, we can understand the Parshanut of Hachamim. Again, Rashi, and we have to understand, of course, all the nuance. Rashi adopted Menachem ibn Saruk's Perush for the Sharashim because Menachem ibn Saruk wrote in Hebrew, and Rashi didn't understand Arabic, so he couldn't adopt Hayuj's Perush and Hayuj's particularities because Hayuj wrote in Arabic, and it wasn't until Ibn Azra translated Hayuj into Hebrew that it was made available in Hebrew. So you have, in Rashi, you could see many Perushim where he'll take a two-letter shortish, like the Hashemish Ba'a. Ba'ala Tahaya, he says the shortish is Bet Aleph, etc. So I hope everyone enjoyed it, and I hope again that you all became infected a little bit, and we'll now look a little more closely at what the Parshanut of the Mikra is and what the Mefarishim say, and go on from there. Thank you very much.